In the 4th century BCE, the Emperor Constantine had a church built over the tomb of the Apostle Peter. Ever since, St. Peter's, or San Pietro, has been the principal site of worship of the Catholic Church located in Vatican City, Rome, Italy. In 1505, Pope Julius II made the radical decision to demolish old St. Peter's and build a much grander basilica. In total, the new St. Peter's took 160 years to finish and combined the work of a succession of great architects. The altar end was begun based on a plan by Donato Bramante, but crowned with a majestic dome designed by the Renaissance genius Michelangelo. The dome was completed after Michelangelo's death by Giacomo della Porta. In 1603, work began on Carlo Maderno's design for the nave and facade. The basilica and the piazza outside were finally finished in 1667 by Gian Lorenzo Bernini. He devised the great oval colonnade of columns, 4 deep, which surrounds the Piazza San Pietro. Pope Julius had ordered the demolition of Old St. Peter's to accommodate a grandiose tomb for himself as part of the new basilica. He commissioned Michelangelo to design the tomb. It was planned as a structure several stories high with more than 40 larger-than-life marble statues. The quarrying of the marble alone took most of the year 1505. Michelangelo began to carve the statues only after Julius's death in 1513, and the tomb was never finished on the grand scale planned. Instead, a smaller monument was installed in another church, San Pietro in Vincoli in Rome, between 1542 and 1545. Work on the original tomb was delayed, partly because of its enormous cost, and also because, in 1508, Julius assigned to Michelangelo a new task: to paint a fresco on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel within the Apostolic Palace, the residence of the Pope. The result was, without a doubt, one of the greatest paintings in the history of the world, even though Michelangelo protested that he was not even a painter. In the center of the ceiling, Michelangelo painted 9 narratives from the book of Genesis. These fresco scenes stretched the length of the ceiling, measuring 133 feet long. Above the altar, God separates light from darkness. Another famous scene shows God creating Adam, their fingertips stretching toward one another. Later, we see Adam and Eve's expulsion from paradise. The penultimate scene depicts the flood, a great deluge sent by God from which only Noah and his family are saved. The drunkenness of Noah is the final scene, in which an inebriated Noah is found by his sons. In the 4 corners, Michelangelo painted scenes from the history of the Jewish people. For example, in The Brazen Serpent, Moses saves the Jews from God's plague of serpents. In the crucifixion of Haman, we witness the punishment of Haman for plotting to kill the Jews of Persia. One of the most astounding sights in the Sistine Chapel is the depiction of 12 prophets seated on thrones, 7 men from among the authors of the Old Testament, and 5 women called Sibyls from pre-Christian antiquity. Such is Michelangelo's mastery of perspective and proportion that these figures seem to protrude into the space of the chapel as if they were sculptures, not paintings. As can clearly be seen, Michelangelo painted his figures, even the female ones, from nude male studies. Many of the figures have exaggerated musculature of a kind unlikely to ever be found on a real woman's body. Michelangelo finished the ceiling in 1512 after 4 years of extremely hard work. He had to paint much of the ceiling lying on his back. He returned to the chapel more than 20 years later and, in 1536, began decorating its back wall with his interpretation of the Last Judgment. The fresco was finished in 1541. In this dramatic work, Michelangelo's figures seem to project forward from the wall into the chapel, giving immediacy and added impact to the scene. In the center, toward the top, Christ dispenses judgment. On the left, the dead rise from their graves and the blessed rise up to heaven. To the right, the damned are taken to their doom. The ferryman Charon awaits them with his boat to carry them across the river Styx into the underworld. The vision of the great patrons of the Italian Renaissance, such as Pope Julius II, and the talent of the architects and artists of the time, made possible a large number of astonishing buildings and artworks. Many of these works have endured over the centuries with an undiminished power and beauty that make us continue to marvel at them today. Since 1980, extensive restoration work on the frescoes has enabled thousands more visitors to appreciate these sublime works in all their original color and glory.